Okay, so good evening to everyone. So thank you to the millions and millions of people who are following Photography Chismis PH, whether it's in Facebook or it's in YouTube, Spotify. So thank you for the millions and millions of people who are supporting the channel. And also we would like to to acknowledge yung mga live audiences. We are very fortunate to have Miss Stephanie Frondoso. For tonight, we're going to discuss Anthotypes as sustainable Philippine photography. So just a run through of the topic. So I'll just read from from the slides because this is also for the benefit of those people who are going to view the podcast through YouTube and also through Spotify, yung mga makikinig as a podcast, no. Okay, so indigenous as sustainable. This is what Anthotypes aspire for. Anthotype is a photographic image obtained by using plant dyes or photosensitive pigments in plants without the need for cameras, lenses, inks, lasers, and specialized equipment. Artist, curator, writer, and FOTOMOTO Co-Founder Stephanie Frondoso makes a case for sustainable photography by emphasizing that photography can be done with naturally occurring materials and processes. Such medium also could claim, to a certain extent, that it predates the invention of cameras and challenges our association of photography as a product of modernity. So thank you for joining us tonight for episode 7 of the Marites Talks Kwentuhan sessions on Philippine photography entitled Anthotypes as Sustainable Philippine Photography. Okay, so you're in Photography Chisme, so who are joining us and then who's listening this in the podcast version, the recorded version. So this Photography Chisme, so our goal is really to, ang goal namin is to make ambag sa discourse of what is Philippine photography and also to expand our understanding of what is photography in general. Some reminders and notices. So number 1 is this is a recorded Zoom session. You will be prompted by Zoom for your consent in the recording of this material. So for our live audiences, no. So you should have been prompted that we are going to record this podcast. The recording shall be uploaded to Photography Chismis PH and its various platforms, such as, but is not limited to, Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify, for educational purposes in the aim of contributing to the discourse of photography in the Philippines, which I mentioned a while ago. No? So medyo lofty. So sana makaambag naman tayo kahit konti. This episode of the Kwentuhan session shall not be monetized. Derived knowledge from this program should be cited accordingly based on the conventions and laws on intellectual property in the Philippines as applicable. So although it's chismis, we call it Photography Chismis, as you might have noticed if you've been following the show, no, the podcast, and also the page, you might have noticed na may weight naman yung yung mga sinusulat natin. And also in the podcast, medyo big time mga nagpapa-unlock sa atin, no. So sana magamit yung knowledge na derive from the podcast. And if you're going to use it for any study or any reference, just credit that. We're not going to ask naman payment for it. Just credit the show, no. And then lastly, this Kwentuhan session is an informal discussion and is not a lecture. Comments and questions shall be recognized accordingly by the host, moderator, as applicable. So for our live audiences, you can type in your questions. And also for those who are going to view this podcast on the recorded version, you can type in the comment section, and then we'll try to get back to your questions and your comments on the show itself. So we'll reply through. If you're commenting in YouTube, we'll reply through YouTube. Okay, some plugging, no? So as mentioned a while ago, Photography Chismis, our home is in Facebook, but the podcast version is available on Spotify, YouTube, and now we have Apple Podcast. Pero sa Apple Podcast walang purely audio lang, walang video. Sa Spotify, maganda sa Spotify kasi meron na rin silang video pero low res. And then if you want to get the entire experience of viewing the slides, then we recommend subscribing and liking the page sa YouTube. So Photography Chismis PH in YouTube. Thank you again, Steph. No? So I really appreciate, and I speak for the people who are going to watch this recording. We really appreciate that you took the time to go to our. It's a Saturday night. You should be out partying or going to to galleries, but you're here. So thank you very much. Siguro to start with the opening question. No? So what, in the first place, what are anthotypes? I mean, aside from the one that we mentioned in the introduction, and how does this relate to your process as an artist? We know that you're a curator, you're a writer, but part of you is also an artist. So how does that relate?
Okay, their definition of anthotype is pretty accurate. It is an environmentally friendly way of making photographic prints using the photosensitive material of plants. So with this first picture, a very good example is the ternate flower. This grows abundantly in my garden. So it was one of the plants that I experimented with. At the same time, I realized that in the one and only book I discovered all about anthotypes, it did not have research on the ternate flower. But can you see me? Can you see this? Can you see what I'm holding up?
Yes, is it a book or is it a manual or?
It's a book.
It's a book.
It's the only book dedicated to anthotypes where they tested 100 plants and they didn't have ternate in it, which is why I thought it was worthwhile for me to. And it's very thin. So this also surprised me because anthotypes were invented in the 1800s. So I was expecting there to be a lot more research on it. Anyway, back to this photo. I was focusing on plants that were only in my garden because I began this research during lockdown. And I was stuck with using what's in my house.
So that's fairly recent, huh? That's fairly recent.
Yeah, yes. Only in 2020 did I realize that creativity, is forced out of you when you are extremely limited. So I had nothing but plants, and this is one of the many plants that I tried. So we can move on to the next picture.
Can you see it?
It's very easy to make an anthotype. All you have to do is crush the plant material with water, or some even use alcohol, but water is the most basic. I turned it into, if you have a lot, you can use a food blender, but especially if it's an edible plant. But if you have a few pieces, that's enough to make one or two anthotypes.
So Steph, for this, for example, for this example on the slide, so how much leaves or flowers did this take you, no?
I ended up making hundreds of anthotypes simply because I would have huge amounts of blooms of ternate.
I see. Okay.
But this, like in this little bowl, maybe only a handful of flowers is enough. That's about a handful of flowers.
I see. So talagang yung the pigment of the flower is potent na lang siguro. Potent yung kulay niya, no? Yung pigment niya. I mean, if you're saying that this is just water and the crushed flowers, parang this is really blue for, I don't know. So it didn't take that much petals for you to create this solution, no?
Yes.
Interesting.
It turns to be very blue, but not all plants will have a very dark pigment.
So ito lang specific for this, for the ternate plant, no?
Yeah, in English it's called butterfly pea, but here in the Philippines we call it ternate.
I see. Okay. So should
they use it for tea, or they color rice with it so that the rice looks blue. Then there are many uses of it.
So yun. So do you want to proceed with the next slide or?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay.
We can.
Ayan. So ayun pala. Ayun ternate, no? Ternate with baking soda. With lemon.
What I did was I tried so many others, not just ternate, but I had to create my own palette so that I will remember. Sometimes the emulsion is not going to be the same as the color of the plant. Or just because, let's say, the plant is pink, the emulsion might be a completely different color, like brown. So, and then I also realized that if you add little ingredients like vinegar, it changes the acidity, so it changes the color. Or baking soda, which is a base, it also changes the acidity, so it changes the color.
So these colors are also, I mean, aside from what you mentioned, no? So you have the pigment or the petal itself, and then you crush it, and then you parang extract the pigments using either water or alcohol, or in this case, parang you also used lemon or any kind of liquid, no, parang solution. But aside from this, is there any specific effect then of that solution on the, no, on the what's the substrate? Meaning, if in this case you're using paper, so would that also have an effect?
It definitely has an effect because different kinds of paper have different kinds of acidity levels. So the color changes depending on what paper you're using. And every little thing has an effect. Like you would see onion skins there. So I was just using kitchen scraps. If I had onion peels, I would boil them, and that forms a dye. Inventor of anthotypes were scientists in the 1800s. And yeah, at the very last palette, you'll see avocado seeds. If you boil avocado seeds, you'll have a pink color. So these are also used by people who dye fabrics in natural organic dyes. They also know these tricks, that boiling an avocado seed will produce pink, or boiling onion skins will produce a rich orange color. They also know this.
Alam mo, Steph, when you sent me this photo, no, one of my initial reaction is that it feels somewhat new for me that we're talking about photography and anthotypes. When you look at the process and up to this point, when I saw this image when you sent it to me, but it feels like, imagine a photographer having a palette. It's not usual to hear that. I mean, to have that those strings of words, diba? Those two words, na palette and a photographer. It's not usual because, diba? I mean, one of the key points here is that you're creating the color baseline. Unlike when
In
you
an
go
like in an analog way. I'm
yeah,
not creating,
analog way, correct.
not
And
digitally.
kaya ano, I really felt some attachment then when you mentioned it, no, I 3 months ago or 2 months ago. And December last year pa when we were talking about this, no. Parang
Yeah.
I mean, syempre it's liquid. It's not pero there's still physicality, and you're creating a palette. And that's something new for probably for the people who are going to watch this podcast, na parang astig, parang similar to a painter. You're creating parang a palette. But baka mamaya mag-react na naman yung mga ano, so kailangan mo ng knowledge about painting and color theory to do photography. Not necessarily. I'm just saying na I can see that connection of the artistic process of building a palette. So even a photographer, for professional photographers, when we do, diba, when we do our planning for a shoot, we also do a palette. But the different with this, it's an analog palette. It's on a paper. It's pigment. It's liquid. In the contemporary processes of photography, it's all computer. It's all digital. It's a mouse. It's your eye in your mouse and a display. But here, as you would see with the process of Steph, it's a substrate. There's a blender, there's liquid, and then there's a plant. It used to be a living, diba? It's a living organism. You crush it, and then you create parang color from it. I mean, not create, extract pigments from it. And in a way, for me, I mean, ano naman, aware naman ako with other alternative processes, and also the physicality of some photographic processes. But specifically with Steph, you have, I mean, our viewers should see how special this is. No? This is special in the sense that you're building an analog palette. So, yun. So, binibuild up lang kita kasi, Steph, kasi I remember, no? I mean, we were talking about this previously. Parang, I have also had so many things na I noticed on your process. No? So, sige, let's proceed with that. So, ito na.
So back to the palette.
Ayun, sige.
Specifically, they're called emulsions. So I'm making homemade emulsions.
Emulsion.
Emulsions are used, I guess, in Polaroid, or what do people know? Polaroid, I guess, or other machines or other kinds of paper in photography. But in my case, I made my own emulsions, or anthotype makers can home make their own emulsions.
And specific naman dyan sa point mo yan, the idea of an emulsion. No? So, emulsion specifically for darkroom processes and the printmaking process, not in the shooting. Again, for those who are watching this, no, in a way, this is something new in the sense that we're not focusing on the shooting. We're focusing on the emulsion, how to create a print, or at least there's a physicality to it, no? And siguro ang input ko dito is that when Steph mentioned that she is the one creating the emulsion, it's also to do a parang a comparison. When we think of printing or photographic printing, most of the chemicals and also the processes, it comes out of a factory. It comes out as bottled solutions. Like for example, a Dectol, diba, a fixer, all of these things are coming out of a factory. It's manufactured. It's mechanical. I mean, diba, it's an industrial product, and then you have Anthotype na specifically sa process ni Steph. It's physical. I made it as an artist or as someone who's doing the Anthotype. No? So we can go back to it later. No? So, yan.
Yeah, so the first thing I did, so this is to illustrate people how easy it is to make an anthotype. The liquid, I just brushed it on to paper. Specifically, this one was watercolor paper, because watercolor paper can absorb a lot of liquid, and I wanted to do 3 washes to make it really, really blue. And then I just selected plants that were in my house because I had no choice. I couldn't even leave outside my gate. So that's a plant that's just growing in my garden, and that's a bark inside my house.
So tama ba? So
Mhm.
para siyang photogram process.
It's a photogram, yeah. It's a solar. It's a lot like a solargram or a photogram, or yeah. And yes, the physicality, as Tony mentioned, is important, because even how we define photography in FOTOMOTO, it's using light. It's an object that uses light sensitive material, so it's not just the digital file. It's the light sensitive material is included, and in this case, it really is included. So then I just clip it. I clip it so that it won't move, because exposure is probably 1 whole day, at least for this flower. The people in other countries, exposure takes even as long. All plants have different light sensitivity. Ternate is extremely light sensitive, but some plants, it takes weeks for it to react. And in other countries, there's not much sun, but in the Philippines, we have a lot of sun. So which is why anthotyping is really perfect for the Philippines. So I clip it so that it won't move, because I'm going to leave it outside for a whole day. And then we can move on to the next.
So for example, Steph, when it comes to this, no, isa pang na-notice ko on this process, no, this is also one kind of contact photography. I mean, siguro kung magiging technical terms for us artists and also curators, writers, we also make a distinction between a photograph, which is you take an image using a camera. There is detachment. There is a distance between the subject and the camera and the artist. So parang clear yung space between, mayroong distanciation between the subject, the camera, or the photographic device and the subject. However, when you look at this process, this is contact. The process reading of this photography is that to make an image, a photogram or a solargram, you have to put the subject itself on the substrate and the emulsion together. Ang distinguishing idea dito is that you can do photography na hindi detached. To a certain extent, it can say that way, no? I mean, if you read the process, So aside from the image that you're creating, the process itself, there's already parang meaning, no? I mean, having no distinction or no distance between the subject, the process, and the artist. So it's more uh, intimate, I guess. So part of the physicality is the intimacy that you have built right into the process. No? So ito yung ano,
Yeah, I'm not sure if maybe your students know Man Ray's work.
alam nila yan.
So it's a lot like Man Ray, contact print, but of course this one's using plants. And this is when I removed it, this is happened. Yeah, that's the print. So since we are looking at that, this is when I think I should emphasize the history of anthotypes a little bit. This precedes the cyanotype. I suppose scientists used to be drawing the plants that they would see all over the world, but drawing is not very accurate because it's just they were looking for more accurate ways of capturing plants all over the world. So then scientists invented anthotypes and cyanotypes, and there are 5 people who invented anthotypes, who their research came together. The most important is Henry August Vogel in 1816. He's the first one who noted or discovered that plant juices are sensitive to light. And then the next important person who contributed is Sir John Herschel. He's also the inventor of cyanotypes. He didn't just invent cyanotypes, he invented many photographic processes, including the anthotype. I mean, his research contributed to the anthotype. But then there was a woman named Mary Somerville who did the most extensive research of all on the action of rays of vegetable juices. But all her findings could not be published because she's a woman, and so it's not allowed. All her research to Sir John Herschel. Yeah, so it actually, that's how photography was born. They were trying to document plants and people from all over the world. And then this is the next step, and then the camera is the next step, but this is before the camera.
I see. So ito yung ano, no? So what we're seeing right now is the contact print, no? So the contact print of that ternate plant.
Yeah, so now they see a very accurate, the scientists, they now have a very accurate shape of these leaves. Before, people would draw these leaves, but now this is the actual shape of the leaf and the branch.
So tama ba, Steph? In this image, siguro baka lang di lang siguro nakikita nung, I mean, the people who would see this in YouTube, no, kahit na if they view it na full HD. Tama ba na the image is, you won't see the veins, tama ba? Or maliit lang yung image natin?
In some cases, we can see the veins. We might be able to see it in one of my other slides.
Okay. Sige. So pero
Yeah.
for this image, no, specific photo, hindi ganon ka-defined yung yung translucency of the veins of the of the flower, or probably or hindi lang natin makita from this distance. We would need to look at it closer, no? Tama ba?
Yeah, because
Okay.
this plant that I used had very thick leaves. But if it was finer leaves, we would see the veins.
Okay. Sige. So ito. Yan.
Okay, when I installed this in my garden, it actually shows that the blue can have variations. So again, it's because I use different kinds of paper, or sometimes I combined other ingredients with the blue, but this is one of my first points about accessibility. Anyone can have a show. It doesn't have to be in the white walls of a gallery. You can have a show in your home and it's still a show. So I made it a show. I called it Makeshift Museum of Anthotypes. And it's a short show because I hang it and then I have to take it out because it will fade over time. So if I don't want it to fade, maybe I can hang it for 2 hours max and then I have to take it out.
So, tama ba, Steph, na Anthotypes are not fixed basically, since you don't have a fixer, no? You don't have a fixer.
It's not fixed, and that's actually why it did not gain prominence. And it didn't gain prominence in history because people thought it had no commercial use, because the image would fade. But I suppose anthotypers are proposing that even if something is ephemeral, it's still art.
Yung ano nga, I think later we mentioned prior to going online, we were saying na yung modernity, no, siguro I'll insert it later, no, so a latter part, yung idea of art and science, siguro to a certain extent has to last. An image has to last. A fact or a truth has to last. So we associate photographs as evidences, diba? I mean, they are records. We use this family of terms in our conception of what is photography. It has to be fixed. Kaya nga when you do darkroom processes, diba? I mean, for those who are listening to this, no, so we're being very liberal because the assumption also that you might need to have some background on darkroom processes. So when we talk about darkroom processes, you have a developer, you have a fixer, and diba? Yung ganong process. Pero we'll also try to make this conversation a bit more accessible for those naman na bago dun sa aside from digital, merong kasing darkroom processes. And in a way, this is also very important what Steph is saying in a lot of levels, in the sense na, again, kanina parang we were saying that photographs, kadalasan when we conceive of photographs, you have a camera. In this case, it's a photogram. Aside from that, so there's no distanciation between the subject, the photographic device, which is in this case, wala namang device in a very technical sense, but there's still the paper, the substrate. And then you have the artist who's handling the image, making the image. It's not even shooting the image, diba? And then aside from that, Steph also mentioned something to do with you being an artist. Diba? Na parang when you do art, the good thing with, I mean, one of the highlight na nakuha ko dun sa sinabi ni Steph is that in this situation, she had the show. And when we think of the show, obviously we want someone, there's to a certain extent, we think of a show as having an audience, and it's not wrong, diba? I mean, most of us are, as artists, we usually think of a show as an exhibition. You show it to the world. But in this case, Steph was doing it primarily for herself first, diba? Doing art for herself first. And if in case lang na she didn't have this photograph documentation of these photographs for the rest of the world, she would still be completely happy to have done the show. And it also parang reminds us that when we do art, probably the main audience would be you. I mean, you use in the first place, Steph and I have had a lot of conversation about what is art, no? So, naabot kami ng 5 hours, 8 hours just talking about what is art and how it's manifested in the world. And one of the things that we agree on is that it is an act by an agent first. Whoever created the art or whoever read the art, yung subject first, kung sino yung nakakita ng work or sino yung gumawa ng work. So, in a sense, art doesn't require an audience to a certain extent. Syempre, there's a lot of maraming context yun. But what we're saying is that when you do art, siguro the first audience, if there is any, is you who made it, diba? So kaya I like the way yung thinking ni Steph, na parang it brings us back to the concept of what is art. Does it have to be a show that is grandiose, something that's commercial, or something that is popular? You do art for yourself first, I guess. I mean, at least in the context of what Steph is saying, no? And lastly, siguro, just to close this, yung itong parang mini summary ko, is that ang galing ng idea ni Steph na photographs need not be fixed. Siyempre may documentation photograph siya. Pero again, art conception of photographs, it has to be factual, it has to last. And yet, anong lifespan, Steph, ng isang anthotype?
Depends on the plant used. In the case of ternate, if you continually expose it to the sun, in a few days it will be gone.
Galing, di ba? I mean, the ephemerality of an image, and I mean that's not something that everyone talks about. It's usually we think of photographs as it should last 100 years, 200 years. It's evidence, and yet this work existed for siguro 5 days.
Well, I kept them in a dark place, so they still exist.
I see, I see.
I only exposed it in the sun for the show. It was a 2-hour show, but it was an online show also. I mean, yeah, I put my so people saw it and learned from it. I mean, there were so many online shows during the lockdown, so this was one of it. And I mean, I want to point out 2 images. If you look closely, there at the bottom left, there's an image of a dress. That was my tiny ballerina tutu when I was a little girl. So what I'm trying to say is plants, they grow, they change every day. The little girl dress, yeah, I've outgrown it, but I'm still a dancer. But the plants never look the same. Some fall and die. So in some of these cases, there are fallen leaves. There's in the very middle, there's also an image of something that looks like a shirt. That's actually a hospital gown. Because when I had a major accident, somebody gave me a toy with a stuffed toy wearing a hospital gown. And it's also my way of including in this exhibit the fact that we can heal, we can get out of the hospital gown. It's ephemeral. I mean, it's not permanent as well. Our bones heal, humans heal. This is the record of it, or this is the record of my ballerina dress. But this is still part of me, but it changes. It's not me anymore. I'm not that little girl anymore, or I'm not the injured person anymore. The bones heal like nature heals. So that's how modern artists can use anthotyping. It doesn't just have to record plants. It can record any idea you want to convey.
So siguro for our viewers, no, and also the listeners, if you would hear the way Steph talks, that's usually how artists talk. In a way, parang artist talk pala to, no? In the sense na when you look at photography, again, it's not just something that you see. It's something that it's a process. Photography is the process. So part of the process is the thinking of a concept. It's the process of creating the image. It's part of the showing of the image. It's partly the reading of the work itself. It's partly the reading of the process. Like I'm not sure kasi Steph, I'm making this parang I'm just articulating this kasi some of our viewers probably from my network are used to siguro digital photography. And usually pag photo, 'di ba, pag mga photo contest, minsan the basis of the value of an image is how it is able to showcase how good they were in following the formula. I mean, I'm not discrediting, guys. Yung mga lalo na yung mga kaibigan kong galing sa camera clubs. So I'm not saying I'm not trying to trivialize that. I'm just saying that there is also one way of reading and doing photography that is going beyond the technicals, the lens, ano yung lens, ano yung aperture mo. Diba minsan pag photography yung iba sa atin, matanong, sir, yung galing ng shot, ano yung settings? But in this sense, as when Steph talks, you would hear the underlying valence, the underlying value of what she's doing. Na I mean, not everyone would read an image of a little girl's dress that way. If you were not aware of that process, that anthotype process that Steph is doing, diba? So she was very precise naman on trying to explain that. But I'm just trying to highlight that na even that concept of growing up and the image that you are left, I mean, the objects and the images and the appearances that you leave behind, and then you do anthotyping, may laro doon, diba? May dynamic valence, yung valence, yung pala step, may pinapasikat akong terms of photography, valence. So the idea of the valence, at saka sa art criticism, no, yung valence na parang it's something fluid, and yet it makes sense in the sense na, yeah, for example, yung the valence of that concept that you said, the process, the growing, all of those are parang a dynamic constitution of what valence is. And when we look at your work, there is something powerful about it. Not just on the image itself. It's actually our experience of us hearing you talk. It's us knowing the background of that image, of us knowing your process, and then yung inclusion mo of the dynamic process of growing, and also environment, growing and healing and moving and being dynamic. So I mean, ang laman ng show na to, I mean your process. So yun. So
Yeah.
syempre niread ko I mean, on behalf, for the benefit of those who are not used to these kinds of photography. Yan. So I'm doing that to articulate that. So yun.
Yeah, it's almost like I made a photo series. Photo series usually tells a story, right? Or it communicates something. So that's what I'm trying to communicate with this series. Yeah, we can move on to the next slide. This one is more colorful already. So I just wanted to show everything I tried, or a lot. I tried a lot more than this, but many other colors that I tried that mostly had to do with avocado seeds or onion skins, so kitchen scraps. Which I wanted to show this photo because of wanting to show how accessible anthotyping can be. You don't even have to spend anything extra. You can just use your kitchen scraps if you were eating avocado, or if you were eating onions, or anything you can think of, you can use for making anthotypes. I think some of those images had leftover wine that gone bad, or you can't drink that anymore. Or I think for one of my dishes I was putting turmeric. The yellow one is turmeric. Yeah, just example. Okay,
interesting din yung wine, no? I mean, the associations that as artists, no? I mean, and also when we, ang problema natin kasi mga artists din, no? When we think of things, everything is an art object. We can read into things as much as we can, and in a way it makes our lives meaningful din, no? So for those people who are parang new to this kind of interpreting or reading images, so if you like this, so there is something more about photographs and art in general, to a certain extent, na when we read things, actually part of the experience is reading into it, diba? I mean, explaining, I mean, the associations that you make about wine and over wine. Even yun, parang for me, ang dami ko naisip na concepts eh. So, nakakatuwa.
Mhm.
So, ano, next slide.
Yeah, okay. Well, I wanted to teach Anthotypes, but unluckily, it just so happened that Leslie De Chagas of Project Space Filipinas invited me to give a workshop in Lucban, Quezon, which is a very agricultural town or community. This was the poster for it. And then we can move on to the next slide.
So no, just a quick question about this, no. So, this was in 20. Is this recent or was this in 2020 then?
This was in, if I'm not mistaken, 2021.
2021, okay. So ano,
Yeah.
so parang ang maganda din dito is that you learned in 2020 and then in 2021 you're teaching kids na, no? I mean, di ba parang ano rin, there's something.
Yeah, kids and adults.
Diba?
Because I really feel that art must respond. Well, okay. Tony doesn't want me to use the word art, right?
I mean, ngayon pwede. Walang problema ngayon. Walang problema ngayon. Walang problema. We can use art kahit na 1 million times.
Okay. It can't be selfish. We have to respond to our times. And this was my way of responding to our time, contributing to the community. I find it very selfish to make, anyway, that's just my personal philosophy. I was happy to be able to share with the community, and by sharing with the community, later on, I will tell you the ideas they came up with. So it just gives birth to more and more ideas.
Ako siguro yung coming from what you said, no? Yung I mean the context of this, no? Parang in a way it breaks down the idea of art as being a privileged experience. It has to be exclusive, it has to be difficult. To a certain extent, there is rigor naman kasi I mean, you have to do something. There's effort into it. There's time, diba? But then again, it doesn't have to be exclusive to artists. Art is not necessarily exclusive to artists. It can be, I mean, in this case, it says kids from 19 to 15 years old. So art becomes, and photography specific, since these are anthotypes, no? It becomes inclusive. It's inclusionary, or I mean, it's accommodative of all types of ages, and in a sense, even the consciousness that you bring into the process, you don't have to have the consciousness of us, no? Kami ni Steph, I mean, we're artists, we're photographers, we write then also. I mean, I don't write as well as Steph, pero at least we can say now we read images more extensively. But it doesn't mean that for you to appreciate art, you have to have that background. I mean, Steph is a curator. I'm a teacher. But do you need to be a teacher and an artist and to be a curator to participate in art? In this case, you have kids. Diba? So parang magandang ano rin yun, magandang point din to highlight na even if it's an alternative process, and in some cases, when we think of alternative process in photography, difficult yan kasi you have, like for example, diba sa arena, yung chemicals nila, controlled substances, diba? So merong skills and merong rules and may guidelines, merong technique and merong policies, merong formula on how to handle the proper management of those substances. So ano yun? So that's one side of photography na lalo na pag alternative processes. So it is difficult. There are alternative processes that is really difficult. So you have to be a specialist to do that. So we have friends like sila Reina, no? And sila Alan, Razo, yan. But then again, when you go here, you have kids touching, feeling, holding, making anthotypes. Diba? So yun yung magandang thing sa ginagawa ni Steph din.
So here is, on the first day, I gave a workshop to children, and on the second day, I gave a workshop for adults. But here are some of the children holding up their certificate. Yes, as Tony said, yeah, I believe that children can make art and children can take photographs. It doesn't make it any less valid just because a kid took it. So here's these very happy children. And when I first started to wonder why this method is not taught in schools all over, not only the Philippines, but all developing countries, because it's so cheap. It's cheaper even than traditional art materials like paints. Just get plants around you and crush it with water. So it's way cheaper than paint. Paint's expensive. Yeah. So this long discussion I had with Leslie de Chavez, and also A.G. de Mesa, who actually proposed a book that could be distributed to schools, but I just don't have time for that right now. But hopefully soon I will. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Yeah, this is an adult. This was from the next day when I was teaching adults. They also, very few people know about it, including adults. They don't know this extremely easy, simple process. So it was nice to teach it to adults. Okay, next slide. That's Leslie de Chavez. He's a brilliant artist. And I'm going to talk more about his own ideas, about what he wants to do with his community, with Anthotypes. He wanted to make Anthotype portraits of people in his community with loved ones who passed away, and then he would install them in their cemetery until it eventually fades over time.
Wow. Astig. Astig. So
That was
has he
a
started it?
great idea. No, he hasn't started. I'm gonna work with him. First, we wanted to do a twofold project, and the second part requires a bit of funding. So I applied for a bit of funding for that. So I'm waiting for that to see if that will materialize. But nevertheless, we don't need funding to do this. It's so cheap to do. But I want to be there. I want to fit it in my schedule. That's going to be amazing to see the community make those portraits of their loved ones and think about them disappearing, the images disappearing under the sun. Okay. And the exhibition space is a cemetery.
Galing. Napaka loaded and poetic naman nung process itself, na parang having portraits of relatives that passed away, and then having images being exhibited or rested, quote unquote, images being rested under the sun and then they disappear, no? Parang doon sa mga viewers at saka listeners, no. Pasensya na kayo, ganito ako mag-isip, so medyo OA ako mag-interpret, pero in a way it is what anong mean ulit? Sorry,
Chavez.
Lester de Chavez?
Leslie.
Leslie de Chavez.
Yeah.
I hope yung dun sa mga listeners, you would also see through that, no? I mean, I'm articulating it, not because I'm not trying to be parang academic or being teacherly. I'm explaining that just in case lang na hindi niyo pa nakikita. I mean, for those who are coming from a different perspective of photography, na this is also another opening up. This is an opening up, a loosening up of art ideas or conceptions of photography na, again, going back a while ago, we think of photographs as fixed. And in this case, the process of letting go, the disappearance, the disappearing, or at least disappearing is not a bad thing. If you relate also dun sa art na sinasabi na planned na work ni ni Leslie. Parang ang galing. Tapos, 'di ba? Cemetery to be your exhibition place, 'di ba? Parang ang galing sobra.
Yes. Leslie actually even had a second idea. The Pahiyas Festival in Lukban is very expensive already because each piece of Pahiyas costs 4,000 pesos to make. So he was proposing that one of the houses is decorated with Anthotypes. Because he's exploring how traditions can evolve. When I did the Anthotype workshop, it was in conjunction with Martha Atienza's video that was being shown there in Project Space Filipinas that showed the evolution of the Ati-Atihan, which of course was animistic and then Christian, religious, and then later on some of the characters had Manny Pacquiao, or there was a boxer, there was OFWs carrying suitcases. And so what she's trying to say is that fiestas and traditions can and should evolve. And how he's reacting to it is that, well, why not also the Pahiyas? Because it's already so unsustainable. What if we decorate one house with Anthotype leaves instead of Pahiyas leaves? And it's going to be much cheaper. And well, the festival doesn't last only, I don't know, days or weeks, but then the Anthotypes fade. So it's okay. Make new ones again next year. That was his second. Yeah.
Galing. Next slide tayo?
Yeah.
Yan.
Oh, okay. Since we are on the topic of Anthotypes, and some people consider chlorophyll prints Anthotypes. A chlorophyll print is a print made on a leaf using the leaf's chlorophyll process, meaning a leaf is a light sensitive material, so it can also record. It's exactly like darkroom paper. It's a light sensitive material, except yeah, it can record under the sun. So I used image of divinity again because it looks ethereal. These are images we may not necessarily see. They are divine images, they look kind of ghostly on a leaf. There's also even some kind of miracle in Batangas of petals with Virgin Mary on the petals. It's so miraculous. And yeah, so I was connecting science with the divine for this particular project, how science is related to religion, because most scientists, if you read their biographies, they end up becoming religious because they just end up realizing by studying science that there's something greater out there, something bigger than them, something designing the world. That's a conclusion of science. So I just wanted to play all those ideas in this work, which I consider a photographic work. Okay, next. Yeah.
The image, how were you able to have that image on the leaf? You had a negative?
Oh, okay. I had, you know, acetates.
Yes,
from before. Yeah.
Okay,
when
okay.
we use slideshow, I forgot what it's called. Yeah, I printed it on an acetate, put the acetate on top of the leaf, and left it outside for a whole day. And by the time,
image?
huh?
And naiwan yung image na ganyan?
Yeah. The image will
see
the leaf will bleach, it'll turn yellow, but the parts covered by the ink will remain green.
Wow, stig.
So if you look really, really closely, that's not a print on a leaf.
Yes.
It is the leaf.
It is the leaf. Oh nga, kaya nga I was thinking on how the image was defined. I mean, there is a screen in a way. Parang I'm thinking on how it was screened, quote unquote, screened. How's the image screened? Because the chlorophyll, obviously, parang the light that touches the leaf, the chlorophyll, is not defined. So I'm thinking of what was the screen that allowed for the gradation and the delineation and the forms to be defined on the leaf. So similar to a negative for those people na ano no, when you okay, do sa mga tao na